President Trump suggests he's giving Ukraine 6 days to accept a new U.S. brokered peace deal. The agreement would include concessions from Ukraine giving up territory currently occupied by Russia. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastor has the latest on the fast-developing peace process.
President Trump suggesting Thanksgiving is the deadline for Ukraine to accept an American brokered peace deal. Trump was on the Brian Kilmeade show on Friday talking about the issue.
So is next Thursday the deadline that you gave, a loose deadline for Ukraine?
Well, we have, I've had a lot of deadlines, but if things are working well, you tend to extend the deadlines. But Thursday is, we think, an appropriate time.
A Ukrainian lawmaker and the Associated Press published a 28-point proposal. If agreed to, Ukraine would receive firm security guarantees, while its still armed forces would be capped at 600,000. The country would formally pledge to not join NATO. In return, NATO would codify that it will never admit Ukraine or station troops there. It also outlines territorial agreements recognizing Crimea, Luhansk and Donetsk as de facto Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky issuing a stern warning on Friday, suggesting that ending the conflict will come at a cost in any of the current scenarios.
Now Ukraine may find itself facing a very difficult choice, either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner. Either the difficult 28 points or an extremely difficult winter, the most difficult, and further risks.
Zelensky also announced that he spoke with Vice President J.D. Vance on Friday, saying, "We managed to cover a lot of the details of the American side's proposal for ending the war, and we're working to make the path forward dignified and truly effective." Russian President Vladimir Putin says the U.S. plan could be the basis of a resolution of the conflict. But he added that if Kiev turns down the proposal, then Russian forces will advance further. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
France's top general Fabien Madon ignites a political row after warning citizens may face sacrifices if Russia tests NATO. Analysts argue the threat is exaggerated while Europe watches closely as the U.S. pressures Kyiv on a peace deal. NTD international correspondent David Vivez reports from Paris.
To prepare citizens for the possibility of future conflict with Russia. His message was blunt. France, he said, must be ready to accept suffering, shift its economy toward defense production, and even face the risk of losing its children if Moscow challenges NATO. Mandon, appointed earlier this year, had already told Parliament that France must be ready within 3 or 4 years for a possible shock involving Russia. But the uproar highlights deep divisions inside France over how real the threat actually is. This reaction follows other measures that have raised public questions, such as the government's plan to distribute a 72-hour survival kit by the end of the year. According to President of Centers for European Studies Rodrigo Ballester, this aligns with previous stances from both France and the EU, which have been warning about the threat Russia poses to Europe.
It's the rhetoric of some countries in the West, notably Macron, for example, Mark Rutte, who is the Secretary General of NATO, that there is a risk of Russian invasion on Western Europe and in Europe in general. I think this is total nonsense. I mean, we can see that the Russians are already struggling in Ukraine. It's shocking to see that France is overplaying the Russian threat. It doesn't make sense, again, to call for these Russian threats, to overplay this Russian threat when actually there are other threats in the European Union that are much more real.
Meanwhile, European leaders are concerned as Washington pressures Kiev to accept a peace deal requiring the Donbass and major military cuts, which many in the EU view as near capitulation. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said today that the US plan must be made with Ukraine and Europe. President Volodymyr Zelensky warns Ukrainians that the coming days could be one of the most difficult moments since the invasion began. He says he's ready for honest work with the United States, but will not accept terms that undermine Ukraine's dignity, sovereignty, or territorial integrity. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Missouri is ramping up efforts to seize China-owned properties in the U.S. The state is seeking help from the